We were on the subject of hadiths,
Right.
or ahadith as they call it in the plural. Um, so I'm gonna really let you lead, and I'm gonna follow up where you take this, and this way I'll know how much of what I need to say needs to be said.
Well, how this conversation came about with you and I is number one. There was an incident in Philly. I guess everybody knows by now
Yeah,
the
yeah.
shooting at the id, right?
Yes, yes.
And it was something I was wrestling with, because the fact that I was people were saying, well, Muslims did the shooting, blah blah blah. And my thing was, I went to a hadith that I read years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago, when the prophet, and I'm paraphrasing, the
Sure.
prophet said, when the thief is not a believer when he's stealing, and or the plunderer is not a Muslim when they're plundering.
Mhm.
And the adulterer is not a Muslim when they're committing adultery. So I was wrestling with that, and I had a conversation with a brother who from Florida. We won't mention the names.
Yeah.
But and he was saying how that particular hadith was speaking to the believer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And there was in that instant, there was a differentiation between Muslim, the label, and
Yes.
believer. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So what happened is that, we talked, and I was wrestling with it. And then, I kind of understood, because I'm a golfer. I don't know if you know golf analogy, but if somebody says they're a golfer, and they pick the club up for the first time, and they go out and they just brutalize the golf course, you don't consider them a golfer.
Not at all.
But if you see them a year later and they're a scratch golfer is with his probably one less than the pros.
Gotcha.
That's how good they are.
Gotcha.
They're 1 degree below the pros. So if
Mhm.
you go out a year later and see this same guy and he's a scratch golfer, then there's been some evolution going on between the day he picked up the club to claim to be a golfer.
Mhm.
So in that respect, people can claim or profess to be Muslim, but it's a process. And I don't know, my when I sent you the text, my concern was, if there's a situation where someone takes the shahada, but there's a period in their growth process that they have to go through to reach a certain level where they will be recognized as a believer. And again, I guess the only one who really can recognize that's as believers is Allah.
That's
so
right.
I wouldn't lay claim to, pronouncing somebody a believer based on, what I see of them, because I may see the best of them. Allah sees every part of them. So, but my concern was, as a community, and in particular a community who came through the educational process or enlightenment process of W.D. Muhammad, do we do enough? And I'm just asking the question. I'm not
Sure.
I'm not indicting anybody.
Understood.
But do we do enough to take somebody who wants to be a Muslim? Because one of the things I thought about in our shahadas, if I'm giving somebody, I've never given somebody a shahada. I mean, I brought them to the temple and the imam gave them a shahada.
Right.
One of the things I would first do is ask them why they want to be a Muslim. So I don't know whether we because is it a fad, or what drove you to want to become a Muslim? Number one. And number two is, do we do enough once they take their shahada, or once a person proclaims to be a Muslim, to help them nurture them through the process to the point where that hadith would apply to them? Does that make sense?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And I'm not sure whether we do it or not. I'm not saying we do, and I'm not saying we don't.
What we're doing here is we're presupposing that the hadith is valid, number one.
Right.
Let me start there.
Right.
That's basically what I was writing you in return, that
right.
A lot of the hadiths that we read and accept, because it has Bukhari and Muslim on it, we think automatic, we don't have to do any further research. We'll just accept it because the general body of Muslims in the world accept it.
Right.
Although in many cases, these hadiths can be very, very spurious, to say the least.
Meaning
questionable.
Okay.
I'll put it nicely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They can be very, very questionable for several reasons. The major reason why they can be questionable in that regard is because none of them originated in Mecca or Medina. I don't know how many people realize that about the hadiths. I mean, out of the 70,000
right
that they supposedly found and reported and so forth, they actually whittled it down to close to 7,000 that they considered to be strong, or at least acceptable. Ones that we should look into, maybe, okay, yeah, well, this sounds right, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's only like a little less than 7,000 that are actually considered to be in a category where we can even entertain the idea. Right. Now imagine that we're talking about 7,000 out of 70,000, 70,000.
Right.
That's a lot of hadiths to say, let's junk those, that they're not, we know those are not legitimate, but because there's this small cadre of 7,000 that some scholars somewhere in yesterday land said, yeah, these are acceptable. We continue, although we have brand new scholars in the world, we have brand new methods for, deciding what's weak from what's strong, but we're not employing those methods. We're just accepting what people did how many years ago? We're talking, 1300 years, what the hadith started coming about almost 300 years later after Muhammad the Prophet had passed.
Right.
So you measure the time between then and 2024. In fact, there is a strong movement right now in Mecca. I don't know how many people know this, where the scholarship has agreed under their new prince, since he's been in office, they've agreed to reevaluate every one of those 7,000 hadiths. And they said the reason they were doing that is because the hadiths, they said, not me, not you, they said the hadiths are the main problems why Muslims are having this level of problematic situations in the world. Meaning why many Muslims are being misguided, even as far as like who the enemy is, what jihad is, what a kafir is, what a mu'min is, the same things we're talking about. What is a quote unquote believer? And the more these people, not the scholars there necessarily, but other scholars have studied that term mu'min, and some of them have determined that that's not even the proper word for what we're in English calling a believer. That in the Quran, there's really no such word as believer, because a believer can believe in practically anything. We used to believe in Santa Claus.
Right.
We used to believe in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that he was a messenger. You know what I mean? You can believe anything. There's Christians believe Jesus is the physical son of God, that kind of thing.
And as you continue to discuss this, also help us understand that terminology, believer, Muslim.
Yes.
But also Allah says, "Oh mankind." So when he's addressing us in that regard, what am I trying to ask? I mean,
I got you on it. I know exactly where you're heading with that. And it's all beautiful and it's all valid. And you're actually asking questions that all of us should ask, but don't know to ask.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying? So I can almost feel what your question is before you ask it. Not that I'm a psychic or anything.
Right.
I've heard these trains of thought enough to be able to put them neatly in the places that I think they need to be in.
Right.
And the first is that the reason I mentioned the meanings of these words is because most of the meanings that have come down to us as Muslims are not meanings that are truly based on verifiable Quranic references. Meaning, when I say Quranic references, the Quran says that we are practicing Din al-Fitra.
Right.
Not Din al-Scholar.
Right.
Most Muslims are practicing Din al-Bukhari. They're not even practicing Din al-Quran from the Quran. They're practicing what they were taught in school, what they were taught in their family upbringing, what they were taught, in the masjid and so forth and so forth. So that's the first major problem, and we're going to have that problem. It's a beautiful dog behind you. We're going to continue to have that problem as long as we do not choose to reinvestigate the meanings of these words. Now, why is that important? Because most of the meanings that we have accepted in our English-speaking brains has been translated not out of Arabic, but out of Urdu and Farsi, out of ancient Persia.
Right. Okay.
Because not a one hadith came about, like I said, from Mecca or Medina. All of the hadiths, every single last one of those 70,000 that they were investigating came out of Persia. That should be the first bullet point. And that should be the first thing that makes us, raise our eyebrows and go, wait a minute, why didn't any of them come out of Mecca? Isn't that where this whole thing started?
Right.
So Persia is known to have multiple sound-alike words because they borrowed heavily from the Arabic language, but then they gave them Persian slants when it came to the meanings. So this word mu'min came later. After arriving in Persia, it was the ancient Persian mullahs, after they were sort of kind of forced to take shahada themselves. They were satisfied with Zoroastrianism, fire worship religion. The Muslims from Arabia invaded Persia, as you probably know, right? Yeah, you're a scholar, you know these things. So they invaded Persia. And when they invaded Persia, they said, well, you either have to take Shahada, become Muslim, or we got to do away with you, which, first of all, is totally against the Quran.
No compulsion in religion.
La ikraha fid din, all day long, right? So that's the first, bullet point and question mark. So why were they doing that is the question. They were doing that because the Persians had wealth and the Persians had a history of science. A history of deep sciences. They weren't just these people worshiping, matches, when the fire, they weren't watching the blaze and, borrowing. These are people who were steeped in the sciences. And Muslims, especially at that time, were very, very deeply invested in learning more and more about the sciences. And we eventually, as Muslims, became the #1 purveyors of science at that time, right around that same time. Now, why is that important? Because when the mullahs agreed, before they became mullahs, when the Persians agreed to become Muslims, first of all, this thing has so many fine points to it that we can't discuss it in just 30 minutes or an hour's worth of conversation. But what necessarily happened was that in order for the Persians to become Muslims, the Persians asked the Muslim imams, listen, if we become Muslims, can we keep our position as leaders over our own people? Muslims said, that sounds right. That sounds right to me. Now you're saving us work. We don't have to be leaders over your people. You become Muslims, you become the imams, you become the mullahs, you become the scholars. You're already scholars. So all you have to do is shift your focus from fire worship to worshiping of Allah. They thought it was that easy.
Simple transition.
Yeah. So the Muslims said, bet, we can do that. But in the process of doing that, the Persian scholars, because they were scholars, they began to reinvent meanings for Arabic words based on Persian connotations for words. So you can imagine after 1,000 years of that coming into what came to be the English language, many of those mistranslations came into all of these other languages also because the first dictionary in the world came out of Persia. The first Arabic dictionary came out of Persia, and that's where they instituted most of those wrong meanings for words, like mu'min, meaning somebody who just believes something. That's not what it means. The word, even the way we understand what a Muslim is, and this is where your original question lies, right? That Muslim versus mu'min, what's the difference? Is Muslim really just one who mumbles some words? La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Now I'm a Muslim. And if that's true, how long does that spell last?
You're right.
When am I to consider myself to be a mu'min? When is the judge in that fornication case or in that theft case or in that beat up a brother case? Well, listen, man, I just became Muslim 2 weeks ago. You can't blame me. Well,
Right.
when is the point? Where's the point of delineation when I can now blame you? You see what I'm saying? So I don't even think that hadith is really saying that. I think if it's a true hadith, that it was pointing out a delineation between um, what you are at the moment you are transgressing, in order to not allow the transgression to be a part of what your belief system, I use that word loosely, is supposed to be. In other words, if you're a Muslim and a Muslim is a peacemaker, and I'm doing something to break the peace, obviously I'm not a Muslim at the time I'm doing that. So I think it was an encouragement for people to stop doing the sin, to stop doing the wrong. I don't think it was just saying that you're weak as a Muslim until you become a believer or a mu'min, and then
Right.
everything is good, and now we can charge you
Right.
with all of the
No, because you still have your natural challenges from the environment.
it's
Always. That you have
always
to resist. And the
yes.
other thing that I was going to say is that where I was having difficulty with this whole process of Muslim or whatever, you don't need Islam to know bad behavior is bad behavior.
You mentioned that. That's correct.
You don't need that. You don't. I don't have to say la ilaha illallah to know what bad behavior is.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's
So
right.
that has be. I don't want to take. I don't want to take Islam and also and this is where I'm worried about the fine line is
Mhm.
giving somebody an excuse for bad behavior because they're only
There
a
you
Muslim.
go.
They're not a
There you
believer.
go. That's
You
the
follow what I'm
concern.
saying?
Sure.
Yes.
That's a
And,
serious, serious
and on top
concern.
of that, they're 15 years old, they're 16 years old, they're 17 years old.
Yes,
That's also in the play with this incident.
exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
And how much is that cultural environment impacting the decisions that they make on a daily basis? And how much influence?
Probably more than Islam.
Absolutely.
Probably more than Islam because
Absolutely. And then for how long? How
yeah,
many years do we have
you
to
know,
say, well, they have an excuse?
right.
The point is that all transgressions come with a consequence. In other religions, they call it karma.
How well do I know that?
We all been there and done that and got the
Yeah.
t-shirt to prove it. Trust me.
Yeah.
All right. So, some people say, well, that for every deed, there's an outcome. For everything good you do, it's in the Quran, actually. Allah says for every deed that you do, you can get 7 times or more benefit from the good, but you
Right.
only get equal to the
Equal
bad
to
that
your
you do. So
bad.
that's
Right.
our form of karma,
Right.
except that Allah does not transgress the limits in paying you back. And then Allah says on top of that, that he can even excuse that if it be his will.
Right.
So we're dealing with a different paradigm when it comes to understanding the logic of what the Quran is establishing. And the Quran, as we know in Surah 30, Ayat 30, speaks about our deen being deen al-fitrah and the deen of our original creation.
Mhm.
So we're not talking about something that some man invented and threw in the mix and said, well, although this is not quite natural, this is what God wants you to follow.
Right.
Everything that Allah asks us to follow can be verified and bona fide by the study of the fitrah, the study
Right.
of the world of natural phenomenon.
Right.
But because most of us have become either too lazy or, like I said, just too ignorant, we don't even know to study nature. That's what the whole Quran is about.
Right.
He's the Rabb of El Alameen. Where's this Al Alameen? It's all around you, right? But if we're not studying it and we're only depending on the
And
scholars, that's where the problem is.
he instructed Adam to do so.
Exactly. How could he name things if he wasn't studying their nature and their
Right.
behaviors?
Right.
Right. So this is where we fall short, thinking that the deen is just a bunch of books that we're supposed to read and volumes of hadith and volumes of sirah and all the rest of this, when Allah says that the Quran is completely detailed.
Mhm.
So why are we running to all of these other sources? I mean, as people who like to read and study, I can understand that. I read them, but I don't read them for guidance, because there's nothing in the Quran that says that these outside sources outside of the Quran, there's nothing in the Quran that says you are to accept them as guidance. Nothing. If your mama says something, your daddy says something, this is Quran, that goes against the guidance of the Quran, you're not to even follow them.
And doesn't our behavior and our actions dictate how much of a believer we are? And the reason why I asked that, of course, in the Quran, again, I'm paraphrasing, Allah tells the Bedouin Arabs that you're not believers or you're not Muslim because faith has not entered
yet
your
entered
heart,
your hearts. That's right.
right?
That's right.
So I can't determine how much faith you have in your heart. I'm a human being just like you. I can't. So, but I do need to have some guidelines as a protection to know whether or not you will even harm me.
Yeah.
So
And those guidelines are in the Quran, in the surah called El-Mu'min. See, people don't understand. Allah will say, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu." Oh, those of you who have accepted faith.
Right.
That's one level. Those of you who have accepted faith. But when Allah calls you al-mu'min or al-mu'minun, that's a definite noun. That means that it's in your behavior.
Right.
The other thing means you're just thinking about it. You know, you're sometimes, because that's amanu is a verb.
Right.
And verbs are sometimes verbs have a beginning. All actions have a beginning and have an end. So I can agree to be a Muslim today and then change. I've seen it happen in my lifetime with other people. I've seen them become Muslim and then become Buddhist. I have a daughter who I was away from for many years. I didn't get a chance to really raise her under my roof. So she started out a Muslim when she was 5 years old. I saw her again at 17 years old. She was a born again Christian. She would tell you that she's a believer because, like I said, you can believe anything. See, but what it is that you do is going to really determine the outcome of your identity. That's really what we're talking about. What is your identity? And the identity that the Quran has emphasized for us is a natural identity. And we are not to be the ones to judge if they say that I was born Jewish. I was born in the Jewish religion. You know what I mean? I was a skull cap wearing, 5, 6, 7, 12-year-old until I read Message to the Black Man at 13. Then I became an adherent, not an adherent. I wasn't really following Elijah Muhammad, except in spirit. I never joined the Nation of Islam. My older brother did. I never joined the Nation of Islam. At 16, 17, Imam W.D. Muhammad came on the set, and I said, that's a logic that I could follow. And I still didn't take Shahada until I was 23.
Oh, okay.
From 17, I was in the masjid almost every week, listening to Minister Farrakhan first, then Jeremiah Shabazz, the whole thing that came through New York.
Right.
And then Ali Rashid, and I finally took Shahada under Ali Rashid, but that was already 1983. But when I did, 12 of my family members were right there with me. So I think that was a nice weight, so we all came in together, and we've been in this thing ever since.
I don't know how much or how focused we are also on writing our own narrative and using that as an example. And I'm gonna give you an example. Years ago, in the 80s, probably around 86, 87, I used to run a street hockey league, right?
Okay.
I worked for a gang organization, Crisis Intervention Philadelphia, which tried to use sports as a methodology in delinquency prevention.
Got it.
So one of the things they wanted to do, because they wanted to get black kids, white kids, and everybody, they came up with basketball for a period, and then they came up with street hockey, which mostly white kids. I mean, I would say 98% of the street hockey players, at least 98%, were white kids. So there's an area in Philadelphia called Manayunk. So at that time, it's changed. It's been regentrified, but at that time, it was a poor, working class white neighborhood.
Got it.
Right. And a lot of the kids never saw black people or whatever. So I recruited one of the teams from that area, right? And one day, I was walking down the street, and all the little white kids were outside playing. And I'm walking down the street, and all those kids scattered and ran in the house as I was walking down the street.
Wow.
One of the kids who played for me, because I was going over their house, the mother came out and the mother, and she came out like she was getting ready, bring her guns out.
Do something,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
What's something on these kids?
Mm.
And she ran out the house and she looked and she said, "Oh, that's just Kevin," right?
Mm.
Meaning that there's nothing to be alarmed
Yeah,
about.
he's safe.
My point being is that
Yeah.
the only thing spoke for me was, for lack of a better term, I'll say my character, the way I interacted with those people.
Sure.
To the point where the mother was alarmed until she saw me, and she was no longer alarmed and comforted her children. To me, that is what Islam is about. That's what being a Muslim or a believer is about, and that people don't have to surmise where your faith is, because your deeds speak for themselves. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I'm not a scholar of Arabic. I'm not a scholar of Quran or Hadith, but what I do, and I lean. I'm like you. When you have to say, and I know people will be upset by me saying this, when you have to authenticate something versus something that the whole universe, Muslim and non-Muslim, believes came from Allah or came from God, I don't think there's any comparison, because the Quran, I've never saw where the Quran had to be authenticated.
Great point.
So, that's what I think that my concern is. Do our young believers understand that? Do they understand that a white person in a poor white neighborhood, when they walk down the street, they're not alarmed once they see you, because you've already demonstrated your character there, and your intentions, and your who you are, whatever. Do we do enough of that with our young people and our new believers?
Obviously not. Obviously not.
Why do you say
obviously?
Well,
I say obviously because there's a serious disconnect between the generations right now.
Oh,
and it's been growing, and especially you know the street. You were there in Philly, you were in New York. You know the deal.
Right.
The First of all, the rate of absentee fathers in our neighborhoods is staggering.
Yes, that's
yeah. So what we're really seeing,
and people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand that the impact of that.
No, they don't. They don't. They think, well, mom's in the home, they should be all right. She'll be mommy and daddy. And that's not how this thing works in the fitral.
Well, even in my life, my grandmother raised me till I was 14, right? And I was scared to death of my grandmother. But there became a point when I was no longer scared to death of my grandmother, and the environment took over.
Yes.
As far as I was raised in the Christian church, and I tell people we went to church 7 days a week. Twice,
Oh, you Pentecostal?
Yeah, all day Sunday, all day Sunday, prayer meetings every day.
Every day was Sunday.
I had to, go out and play, eat dinner, but after dinner we was off to church. You know what I mean? So I say that to say that, the impact my grandmother had on me. You talking about fear constitutes respect. I was afraid of her.
Yeah.
But it got to a point where I was no longer afraid of her, and I was more impressed by the environment than I was
matured. But you were mature.
She ended up shipping me to Philadelphia. Yeah, she ended up shipping me out and it wasn't no conversation. It wasn't no. She came home from work one day, the Wednesday, 1966, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. She said, "You'll be going to Philadelphia Monday to live with your mother." No discussion, no why, no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Fresh Prince.
I was 28 years. I was 28 years old before I understood that process.
Yeah.
But again, so it gets back to, like I said, you don't need to be a Muslim to know something's bad behavior.
No, Muslim is simply it's simply you consciously deciding to be at peace with yourself and with your surroundings.
Right.
So it doesn't even have to be necessarily someone who takes quote unquote shahada. It's anybody who agrees to be in an environment or as the Bible would put it, be ye peacemakers.
Right.
They shall be called the children of God.
Right.
See, that one who is consciously attentive to not causing unnecessary disturbances. Now, they're going to fight if there's a need to fight, but if not, they're not going to try to create a fight or pick a fight,
Right.
because that's not the purpose. That is actually outside of the purpose of everything in the creation. The planet's not picking fights with each other. The animals are not unnecessarily picking fights unless they need to eat and you become the prey or whatever. And then when they're finished eating, they leave you alone still.
Like Chris Rock said, you never seen a lion with his stomach full go hunt.
No, you could, right in the zoo, in the Bronx Zoo or whatever zoo you visit. The reason why the lions and the deer or whatever, the giraffe in this case, can be in the same land space is because they keep those animals well fed.
Right.
And once that lion is satiated, there's no more the hunt. The hunt is over. That's not his fitra. It's not his nature.
Right.
So it's the same thing with human beings, except we're supposed to be dealing on a level of behavior that supersedes the common animal. Common animal is dealing with instinct. The human being is dealing with emotion and intellect.
Right.
So we have to be a bit more refined when it comes to what we decide on as behavior. The animal don't have a decision. Allah clocked it into their genetics. But what we do as thinkers with this intellect is something that we have to decide on fashioning, grooming, and allowing to mature as thinkers. That's what makes that so important. That's why if the male is out of the home in our neighborhoods, it can be disastrous. If you don't really have a strong woman or a strong mother figure like you did with your grandma, then it can wreak havoc on the average one of us coming up in the ghetto, because there's so many, as what Imam Muhammad calls, so many people in the super culture. And that super culture is much more influential than your household culture.
So doesn't that place more responsibility on us with new believers or new Muslims or whatever to have a mechanism?
Absolutely. You should have a full-fledged mechanism right there in your masjid, or if you're Christian, right there in your church. You should have a fully developed program for these youth in order to combat these negative energies that are being purposely put on us in order to purposely keep us back, hold us back. Yes, we should. There should be, just like we go to church every Sunday, we should be going to the masjid, or we used to have the boys club. You remember these things.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Denzel Washington and all those folks, they came up out of the boys club, so that if there was not this strong figure in the household or in the neighborhood, we wouldn't be so much attracted by the drug dealer or by the pimp or by some other strong personality in the neighborhood, because we had positive role models to be taught by. That's what it was all about back there in the day. You had to have somebody positive, but once they started extracting those positive role models from the community, they replaced them with Snoop Dogg and Jay-Z and all the rest of Beyonce. That's the role model for our young girls now. Beyonce, half-naked woman on the stage singing about stuff that it shouldn't even be our business. But this was I say it was purposely done to us. We reached a point in the 50s and the 60s, like you spoke about 1966. So in that era right there were people in our families and in the broader community that were trying to bring us into some semblance of respect, dignity. Sundays, everybody dressed up in their Sunday best. That's what they would call it. And I don't care how small a boy you were, you had a suit and tie on and a pair of knickers as pants. And we used to go to church like that. And we'd come home, we'd take off our church clothes, we put on our play clothes. But we weren't walking around showing the crackers of our butts in the 50s and in the 60s. We weren't doing those things. The girls weren't walking around showing their belly button to every boy who's interested, and tight pants. We weren't doing that. We weren't dressing like that.
I can even remember the advent of the miniskirt. It wasn't always, the miniskirt wasn't always the norm.
No, that happened around the late 60s, early 70s when they started introducing that fashion.
Let me ask you this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You conclude that we're not, for lack of a better term, orientating well enough, right? How do we create a national network so that everybody has an idea of how to evolve. Because I mean, you just can't give about somebody a shahada and say, fend for yourself.
You're on your own.
But I've talked to imams say, well, we do that, this such and such doing shahada. Another one says, no, so, we don't have a common mechanism. I'm stuttering because I don't have a concrete idea of how to implement it. So I'm not, but how do we do? I think we need that. We need a network, a national network, a common network. I know I understand every masjid is on their own, you know what I mean? But there should be some kind of common orientation. You go to college. You go to college. I don't care what your curriculum is or what you're studying. Everybody gets a syllabi.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And syllabi and that it tells you not only the goals of the course, but what the small objectives are. Right. So within the first semester, what's in the first semester, the student will be able to do so and so, so and so, so and so. Now, I don't know if we have a model so that because this environment is strong, man, and you know it. I'm preaching to when I say that, and it ain't like they can come to the masjid and the Juma on Friday, and the rest of the week they're not gonna be bombarded with negative influences. I don't know if Juma once a week is gonna do it.
No, it's not. It's not. I can tell you that. What's going to do it is the strategy that Allah has already put into the pages of the Quran. And it might sound like it's not pragmatic, but whatever Allah puts in the Quran is the best way to go. And Allah says, "O you who have accepted faith, save yourselves and your families from the fire, ... So, and I'm saying this with confidence because this was my upbringing. What saved me from the streets was the fact that I had a very cohesive family. And I don't mean just my immediate siblings. I don't mean the fact that I had a mother and father in the house. Doesn't mean that the father was necessarily like father there, but he was in the house. I could reference a man when I came home to ask certain questions that we only ask men. And I had that. But I also had extended family, aunties, uncles, cousins. Like I said, when I took Shahada, 12 of my relatives came with me. That's how tight we had always been during our upbringing. So to save yourselves and your families means that they have to be the first ones that you discuss these things with. In nature, it's called concentric circles. If you have a still bowl of water and something touches it, the first ripple is going to be in-house. And then it's going to gradually extend outwards, right? Until it dissipates. So it's the same strategy for reaching people. Allah never says, "Oh, you who have accepted faith, go to the outskirts of the land and start teaching there." He says, again, save yourselves, starting with the individual. So you have to be conscious. And then you have to say, well, let me see what Cousin Pookie's up to. And you have to develop a strategy for reaching Cousin Pookie with that essential message. But the essential message is not ritualism. And that's the other mistake we make. We think that the Al-Islam is ritualism.
Right.
Because the majority of the Muslim world believes that it's ritualism. They believe that all of your gifts and blessings and promise for the hereafter is centered around 5 prayers a day, fasting during Ramadan, making a physical journey to Hajj, and mumbling these words called Shahadatain. Those are all rituals. The Quran never preaches rituals. The Quran always preaches routines. And I like to draw the line between those two. Rituals are things that we do that have no perceivable benefit in terms of an outcome. Routines are things that we do, like brushing our teeth, washing up in the morning, taking a shower or whatever. But at the end of that routine, there's a discernible benefit. You see what I'm saying? You're not in people's faces before you brush your teeth. You're not going out after having not bathed for 2 or 3 straight days, and now they can smell you coming. You don't have to do those things. There's nothing in the Quran says you have to take a shower. But I'll put this common sense intellect in the head, right? To be able to say, wait a minute, I need to try and do this better. So routines are designed to make the human life gradually better. towards more and more excellence.
Structure. Right.
Yeah. So that's the approach that we have to take when we're doing what they're calling da'wah. Da'wah is not saying, hey, if you mumble these magic words, you're going to heaven. You're in the group of Muslims now. We're your protection. We're your future. No, these things have to be practiced in our everyday behavior, how we treat ourselves, first of all, how we treat other people around us, our neighbors. It's all mapped out for us in the Quran in Surah 2, ayat 177, on what's called el-bir, meaning what is the righteousness? What is righteous disposition? And Allah begins it by saying righteousness, he begins by telling you what it's not.
Mm-hmm.
He says righteousness is not in turning your faces towards the east or towards the west.
Mm-hmm.
Then he says righteousness is, and then Allah gives a litany of stuff that are actions. Feeding the poor and, treating your parents right. You can't go to the Quranic paradise unless you're doing actions, not just beliefs.
Right.
Not just mumbling words. I said 1,000 dhikrs and that's worth, they made that up.
Yeah.
The same people who made up most of those hadiths, they made up the criterion upon which you're going to go to heaven by just saying things, repeating things.
Right.
Now, if you're repeating good behavior, then that'll get you there. But if you're just repeating words that you read in somebody's book or that your sheikh told you or your imam or whoever, your mama told it to you, that's not going to get you into what's called Jannah. It's not. It has to be a series of actions that are taken. Allah says it very clearly in Surah Al-Asr. He says that the majority of people are lost. Then he says, "Illa ladina amanu," except those who have professed faith, wa and amilu salihat, actions. You see what I'm saying? That are reconciling actions. They don't even teach us the real meanings of these words. Doesn't mean those who believe and do good deeds. No, animals do good deeds, but when Allah says amilu salihat, he's talking about conscious actions. That's amilu, that's conscious actions, not just actions that you do ordinarily that are good. You know what I'm saying? That if somebody asked you later in the day, hey, tell me something good you did today, you probably forget about that little thing that you just did kind of unconsciously or subconsciously. But you're going to remember the big things you did for people consciously. Oh man, I gave the homeless, $100. You know what I'm saying? You're going to remember that. Those are the kinds of deeds that we're talking about that qualify for Allah's paradise here and after you leave here. Because you're supposed to be qualifying for paradise while you're living.
I'll give you another example. It happened to me a couple of weeks ago, right? So I'm coming from the Wawa, and I see this car in the driveway of this house with their flashers on. So I'm driving, and it just dawns on me. I said to myself, I wonder if they ran in the house to, put the flash. Why would they put flashers on in their parking and in their driveway?
Good question.
I turned around. I went back and knocked on the guy's door. Guy came out. Who's knocking on my door? You the police or somebody? I said, no, man. I don't know if you did it or not on purpose or not, but your flashers on. And he didn't know that his flasher was on, so he thanked me or whatever. But to me, in my thinking, that is practicing Islam. That's something that small.
Absolutely.
Could get me to paradise.
What would have happened the next morning when he came out to go to work?
And he didn't have no battery. Right. So but are we educating our youth to say that that's practicing your religion? Something as simple as that.
We have to repeat
somebody's door, tell them their flashes was on.
What you just said, we have to repeat that to our children and our grandchildren. I had this whole conversation, it's interesting, with my children. All of my children are adults now. The youngest is 22, and the oldest was 40. But we had this conversation at my daughter's janazah last week in Brooklyn. And they're just some on the ball children, man. I thank Allah. And I know I don't take any credit for it. I know it's just the time, the circumstances, and the fact that one thing we did do consciously was make sure that they did practically everything together. you know, especially they're in 3 different households. There's 3 in the first household. 1, that's the one who just passed, Naja. And then there's 4, the youngest of 4 in the same household. Now, we made sure they did everything. If one wanted to go to the grocery store to get whatever, you know, bag of chips, all 4 of them had to go. And they loved it. And to this day, they are the tightest siblings that I have ever seen on planet Earth when it comes to that. And they're thankful for that. You know, I just left them earlier. They were going shopping. Guess who was there? All 4 of them. And I'm talking about people who are now married and with children. They still say, well, what day are you free? You know, like it's Saturday at 2 o'clock. All right, meet me at the Lidl's or meet me at the Shop Mart or what, you know, whatever. So the Walmart, I meant to say. But no, these are things that we have to have as principles that we pass down to our children. They can't be lip service. It's got to be that you show them how to do it. You follow up with them on how to do it. And then you have question and answer sessions in your home. We get together to watch, you know, booty shaking music and videos and stuff like that as families. You know, the family really doesn't care anymore about what's being played in front of the 5-year-old or the 3-year-old or the baby sitting there with the bottle and pacifier in his mouth, looking at all of this crazy stuff that we want to look at. We don't even think about that anymore. So we are living almost a completely unconscious existence right now as people. I mean, the average American, not just us folk. We're just totally unconscious of what's going on around us because it doesn't challenge us to be better. You understand? So when you finally decide that I'm going to consciously make an effort to be better as a human being, forget Muslim right now, be better as a human. What is this human thing? You know, you remember Muhammad told us how many years ago, you know, that man means mind, words make people. Human means humus, mind, a mind that you're able to put a seed in and get some growth back from it. Most of us are not living that kind of life. We're depending on other people to do our thinking for us. You know, so to put up with a welfare system and to put up with fatherless homes and to put up with daughters who look like hoes from 40 Deuce when we were little. The average one of our female teenagers right now is dressing worse than prostitutes used to dress when I was a teenager. At least she had some shame. These sisters, these little 13-year-olds and 17-year-olds, man, they can't wait to show their curves. They can't wait to you know, demonstrate in front of the young boys. And then they'll get some young dude or whatever because Jay-Z said so, or, you know, again, Snoop Dogg said this is how you're supposed to treat girls. And these women will do all of these different crazy things for these men. And what makes those daughters of ours even worse than the prostitutes is that the prostitutes at least got paid.
Yeah. So how do we, you know, how do we create among our different communities a national narrative?
Begin in your family. Have a weekly or bi-monthly get together in the form of a luncheon or even a dinner, an early dinner, where they're not just coming to eat your food, they're coming to discuss issues that directly impact them. But you can't do it as a preacher. You can't do it as an imam who has to open up with half of the Quran before he starts speaking to them.
Right.
Can't do it like that. You got to know their lingo. In many cases, you got to know what they're listening to as music and what's shaping them on that level, or else they're just going to fake and phony it in front of you, and then they're going to go back to their regular life. And that's what these Muslims are doing. They're taking the Shahada in front of you. They show up on Friday, and you say, "Oh, well, did you learn another piece of the ritual Salat yet?" And then when they leave you, and I'm telling you what they tell me. Now, remember, I taught high school in New York City for 13 years, so I know the teenage mind.
Right.
And I'm telling you that many of them, just to be comfortable around you, will say and do what it is you say and do. But on the weekends, they shooting up in the park. I don't mean shooting up drugs. I mean shooting up literally. You see what I'm saying? Because that's what their peers are doing. And again, the super culture is much stronger of an influence than the normal family culture and the normal, you know, the culture of the block. We don't even know our neighbors anymore. How about that? You don't even know who that is living next door to you until the news knocks on your door and say, "Hey, did you know that this guy was a mass murderer?" You know,
I don't know, and you can help me understand this too, how much of a community presence that we have. And I'm gonna give you an example. and I hate to always, I don't always do it. I just hate to do it.
Yeah.
Compare things that we did when we were in our own personal days of Jahiliyyah. But I do have to say, when I was in the Nation of Islam, I probably got more fish or recruits
Yeah.
from the weekly house meetings we did. You remember we used to do house meetings?
Sure. I
In
was
the
with my brother
neighborhood?
when he used to do them. Sure.
I probably recruited more people from that than I did selling papers and selling fish or whatever.
Yes.
But I say that to say that when we had those house meetings or whatever, and I'm not excusing any behavior from the first, so
I
don't,
got
I'm
you.
not doing that.
Yeah.
I'm just
Clear.
saying that was just one mechanism that kept you visible in your own community.
Yes.
So, I mean, I used to have every Wednesday, I used to have house meetings at my house, and the people in the neighborhood would come. And like I said, not only come, but a lot of them became Muslim.
Why
At that,
stop?
right.
Same
So
strategy, different message.
my point is though, but we seem to have gotten away from having a community presence
Yeah.
as a group of people.
Yes.
We're kind of like, that's the Muslims over there.
Yeah.
And we should be the Muslims over there.
Yeah.
We should be, oh, that's my neighbor.
Yes.
Or that's the guy across the street.
Yeah.
The Muslim, or that's the Muslim family down the street.
Yeah.
I'm again,
The value.
I don't have no national audience or whatever, so I can't say it's not going on.
The value in the minds of the people is not the same. Do you remember, and I know you do, I'm speaking just to the audience now, when, I grew up in New York, of course, Harlem, 116th Street, number 7, Temple number 7.
Right.
Minister Louis Farrakhan. I was under all of that when I was 13, 14, 15, 16,
Right.
going on 17. And I remember walking on that corner, Lenox Avenue, that little L-shaped corner. And I remember looking for a cigarette butt on the ground and couldn't find one because the brothers at the door would stop you. If you thought about flicking that cigarette butt on the ground, I saw it. I saw a guy flick it on the ground and I saw the brother approach him, and the brother who flicked the cigarette butt, he apologized. And then he looked around. Oh, I didn't know I was in front of the mosque, brother. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, bro. He was apologizing for flicking his cigarette butt outside on the sidewalk. Go to that same sidewalk now and count the number of cigarette butts that you see. People are not conscious of that anymore because the community mindset is no longer present. I remember Imam Muhammad said once about us, his followers. He said, we can't even call ourselves a community. He said, we're merely an association. Now, why did he say that? He said, because a community, the number one requirement, as he said, as my father told you before me, the number one requirement for being a community is you have to have some land. So how many of us followed up on that and said, oh, Imam Muhammad said we need to have some land? How many of us, you and me's around the country, have said, well, let's at least invest in 3 acres somewhere in the country where we can grow some food, where we can be each other's neighbors? See, we're thinking that it has to be these 40 million Black people. And that's unrealistic. Why can't it be these 4 families living somewhere in South Carolina or in Florida somewhere and agree to say, well, and I'm telling you, the more and more we see this unfolding of what's happening in the world right now, socially speaking, the more we should realize that we should have jumped on these opportunities decades ago when Imam Muhammad first mentioned these things, because it's going to be kind of hard now to get yourself 4 and 5 and 10 acres of land unless you got some real money. But the point is that if we can do it together, we still have an opportunity to say, let's put our pocketbooks together and still get, they got, where to get land cheap. Stop trying to be in the center city somewhere. You know what I mean? Elijahville was the first effort in our association, if you remember that. Yes. New Medina in Mississippi was another effort, but none of the young people wanted to live there because they want that city life.
My barber actually grew up on a farm in Georgia. I go to a young man now who grew up on that farm. Yeah.
Listen, the whole reason why we're down here in North Carolina right now is to take advantage of that kind of opportunity. And like I said, I don't care if it's 5 acres. My wife and I and the rest of our family members were looking very seriously at it. All of my children moved out of New York, except for one. All of them moved out of New York, and they now live down here. None of them are more than 20 minutes from where I am.
Mm.
And these are young people. I told you that my youngest child is 22.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from all three, except for, well, my daughter who just passed, she had to stay in New York. She had sickle cell, so she had to stay close to her doctor and yada, yada. But, and one of them is still there. He's autistic, so he's still with his mother in Brooklyn. But all of the rest of them are down here with us. And we're strategizing every weekend about how to get us a piece of this heaven that Allah promised us in this life and in the next.
Right.
But if we don't even like being around each other, that's a problem. People don't even like their siblings. They hang out more with their friends than they do with their own family. And that's the kind of thing that has to change. Save yourselves and your families from the fire whose fuel is men and
Talk
stone.
about this to me, and even correct me if you think I'm wrong. One of the problems we have as a community, in my mind, we're very cliquish. We have a lot of cliques. And what happens to me is that if I'm not part of Benjamin Vallejo's clique, right, I can say something and nobody pay attention to me. And then Benjamin Vallejo can come and say the exact same thing, and everybody targets it right on, you know what I mean? And what that, but it's not so much what it does, what bothers me the most, what it does is, if you're not part of that clique, then you're marginalized. And we talk about all the time, we talk about how the white people marginalize us, right? And then we'll start clicking up because this imam he's so knowledgeable, or this, that, and other thing, and we're so that we end up with, and it's happening right here in Philly. I know we ended up with masjid politics. I hate even saying that, those two words together.
It's an oxymoron, yeah.
Yeah, you follow what I'm saying?
Sure I do.
But when you click up like that, the politics and the arguments and the disagreements become very prevalent, because what happens is, in order for me to click up with somebody, I have to marginalize the person who ain't part of our clique. Or if I don't, it don't make being in my clique special. You know what I mean? In order to make my clique special, I have to marginalize you because you ain't part of it.
Yeah. You are touching on something that is not even spoken about today among Muslims. You're talking about something that is probably the most important issue of the day, not only for Muslims, but for any group, because all groups do that. Back in the Nation of Islam days, we did that, city against city, you know, Philadelphia against, you know, yeah. So what I'm saying with that is that
but a lot of stuff we did was healthy competition.
Yeah. Back in the day. I'm talking about now amongst people who call themselves bona fide Muslims.
No, it's not healthy competition.
What's this Sunni Shia thing about? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this goes back 1,000 years, you know, 1,200, 1,300 years that we've been dividing ourselves superficially and artificially. And we in this day and time have inherited that cliquish mentality.
Right. And
we've inherited.
You argue about the white man marginalizing you, but you marginalize people that it's in your community that ain't part of your so-called
and it's
truth.
Not new. The Quran is the solution for those kinds of artificial marginalizations. The Quran is the solution for that, because if we understood truly what this thing called Muslim is, and truly what this thing called mu'min is, that wouldn't be an issue for us. You understand? It's like and it all begins with the model community, which is called the family life. That's the model. If you don't start with that model, as you begin to grow and expand, it's nothing but chaos waiting for you. Nothing but chaos. Because those people in that group are going to be people who think on that marginalizing, you know, level of thinking. We have to be better. We have to be richer. We have to be brighter. We have to be, we have to have we have to have what other people don't have. Now, that's a tendency just in the natural course of human behavior, but the Quran is here to help us refine that so that it doesn't work against you in the long run. So yes, you have a particular, Allah says, let there rise up out of you a community, upholding and,
Right.
standing for good
Like
and
all that is,
rejecting. Yeah. So you have your uniqueness, but the uniqueness doesn't offend anybody. Your uniqueness is put in place by Allah in order to have you stand out as the model attraction for other people who want that same level of excellence. And you're never going to do them wrong. So your uniqueness is in your excellence. But we don't know how to present excellence outside of what we're wearing as a kufi or a thobe or some dhikr beads. We think that's our excellence. I'm Muslim now, brother. I have to grow my beard, 3 feet deep. That has nothing to do with you being a Muslim, that you're wearing a beard. Are you kidding? Are you counting on some Catholic rosary beads? That's all they are. That's what Muslims got them. They got it from the Catholics. There ain't no issue of Muhammad the Prophet ever having no rosary beads that he's counting subhanallah, subhanallah, subhanallah. You got fingers for that. You got fitra. You got phalanges. So what I'm saying is that we have to move away from all of this artificiality that we've been sold as Muslims and as humans, generally speaking. We got to move away from that stuff if we're going to make progress. And it doesn't matter if you have 1 million people tomorrow join your one masjid. It'll be a burden. It'll be your burden. Because I can have my 5, 10 family members doing it the correct way, involved in building a small family economy. You know what I'm saying? A little grocery store, whatever it is, a little family business or whatever. And then we can have our neighbor. We can begin teaching our neighbor how to be economically solvent and let them pass that down. And that's how you do it. You don't worry about the world. Worry about you and your family and saving them from the nar, from the fire. You understand? Because you can have all of these extended relationships and your family gets consumed by the fire. You're gonna burn up everybody.
I get that, brother Bilal, but when you see you just talked about fatherless kids and stuff like that, or fatherless households, right? And you have to save them, because the guy that I saved might be the guy that was gonna snatch your wife's pocketbook or something like that.
Yeah, so, I get it. I get it.
So I mean, it's imperative that we create some kind of national movement or whatever, for lack of a better term, that we address these things, because I'm gonna be honest with you, man. I ain't this. I can't. I haven't wrestled. I'm still wrestling with this. I couldn't even imagine gunplay at an Eid. I mean, I could have
been the last thing on your mind, right? If somebody said come up with something crazy that would happen at an Eid, your mind wouldn't even go there.
If somebody said to me, I don't want to go to Eid because they might be shooting at the Eid, I would look at them like they was nuts. What are you talking about?
But it happened, right?
But it happened. And so that tells me, and then the other thing that makes me a little perturbed is that we got Muslims saying, well, this is America. It happens to every community in America. This is violence and all that stuff. Nah, man, to me, that's putting lipstick on the pig. We're an exceptional community, man. Allah didn't reveal that Quran.
Let me tell you something Imam Muhammad said, and then you can take it where you want it to go. Imam Muhammad said that, presently speaking, the African American community is a cursed community. And I'm going to tell you why he said that. He said, you are cursed because you asked God for help, and God sent you help. And you decided to really not even accept all of the help that God was offering you. And you just decided to go party hardy, smack some women on the butt. Like I said, think about where we were in the 50s and the 60s in terms of our dignity. the image we were trying to project to the world that just started watching us in the 50s when television was invented or brought into our homes, right? So now here we are. The world is watching us get bit by, German shepherds and watch the fire hoses and all that push us up against the buildings and the police, hitting us over the head with their batons. That's the first image of African Americans that was shot out to the rest of the world. And we then were trying to dignify ourselves every time you saw practically Dr. King. He had a suit and tie on at least, So we were consciously attempting to show a dignified image. But look at us now. Like I said, you got our rappers and other people coming on stage with the crack of their butts showing. And they're calling it music and entertainment. You got our women with the breasts hanging out of the dress and all that. So I'm saying that all of these things are related. Now I'm going to link that to one other thing that I think might answer some of your question, or maybe not. But this is my perspective on this. That what you see playing out in the world right now, as far as the bad behavior, and I'm going to focus on our people. I'm not talking about what other folks are doing.
Focus on our community.
That's what I'm doing.
Muslim community.
Oh, well, it's going to, the Muslim community is a subset of the African American community, because we don't have an overwhelming number of Pakistanis and Egyptians and Sudanese. We don't have that in our community. They have their own separate communities. But generally speaking, when you talk about the Muslim African American community, you're talking about just us or justice, hopefully, right? But the point is that we are not paying attention to the most important criteria necessary for us to pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps and move forward and progress. We're not paying attention to that. And the attention should be paid on our individual consciousness, first of all, or how conscious are we as a community? How much knowledge? All this knowledge we say we have in the Quran and all, it's the best book and the best book of guidance and all that. How much are we really passing that down? Again, beginning with the people that we see every day in our households. We will be quicker to go out on the street and do da'wah than to even speak to our blood relative who's under our same roof, who might be gangbanging and doing some of these other things. So we're actually living a kind of backward, inside-out existence just amongst our own community of people. And many of us, I believe, are accepting this deen, I hate to say it, but as like a getaway. Like, I want to get away from the African American. I want to look different than them. I can't identify with these people anymore. I want to stand out. So I'm going to wear this getup. I'm going to wear this turban. I'm going to wear whatever. I'm going to the extremes on purpose. But I want to do all. See, I can meet you on the street, and unless I could read what that is on your hat, if it's Arabic, I wouldn't know you were Muslim.
Right.
I wouldn't know. I'd have to get in a conversation with you. Look at how challenging that is.
I purposely do that.
So do I.
Because you're not gonna judge me because I'm wearing a red beard.
No. And look at how much you can get away with in the name of that red beard and that kufi. You see, look at how much a lot of the women who are getting away with the khimar or the so-called hijab. They're getting away with some stuff that I know that some of them have done with some young men and that kind. I know what they're getting away with. I know what these other folks from overseas are doing in these bodegas and these Habibi spots that they call them, in Philly and in New York, they call them Habibi spots that are being run by foreign Muslims or international Muslims. I know what they're doing in the back of the store. Not all of them. Now, I'm not accusing all of them, but I'm saying when we were doing street da'wah through Harlem, through Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, and all of that, man, listen, Imam W.D. Muhammad's early community, when he had the BAP program working against blight and patrolling the African American community, he just morphed what the FOI were doing into the BAP program. But we were still policing our own neighborhoods. What's wrong with that? We were still out there talking to our young people. What was wrong with that? They had the PAL. We had something different, like what you were talking about, street hockey and all these other things that they could latch on to.
When I first went to New York in '93, the Ahmadiyya community in Brooklyn had a whole neighborhood that they policed themselves.
Yeah. I worked with the Ahmadiyyas very deeply in Queens.
Right.
I knew practically everybody in there outside of the top guy in the
Right,
Ahmadiyas. They had the biggest Ahmadiyya masjid in Queens. They still do.
right.
They bought a synagogue from the Jews and they converted it into an Ahmadiyya spot. So I was just curious like that.
Mm,
Imam Muhammad said that Mr. Farad was from the Ahmadiyya community. I wanted to know more about them.
right,
I didn't go ask anybody. I didn't read a book on them. I went and asked them and hung
right,
out with them and challenged them.
right.
They got tired of seeing me because I had some questions for them that they did not want to answer, or maybe they couldn't answer.
But
So
I do remember that, you know, they wore white and that whole neighborhood was policed by them.
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, when it's us doing it, they call it racism. You know, when we want to kind of cordon ourselves off and be kind of, independent, they say something's wrong with it. Any other people who do that, they don't get tagged like that. If there's something about the African American, when we decide to do something that's benefiting ourselves and to do that thing practically by ourselves, they say that's racist. But the Greeks can do it, the Italians can do it, the Puerto Ricans can do it, anybody else, the
Right.
Dominicans can do it, and that's fine. That's a part of what America promises. But as soon as we get together and say, listen, we need to be policing, you're talking about the Ansaro, though. I think you're talking about the Ansaro
Oh, is that
community.
who it
That was
was?
yeah, in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
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 because they were in Brooklyn. They wore white.
yeah. They
Okay.
wore white and they drove themselves to the nut house with some of their philosophical
Right,
leanings.
right.
Right. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm
No,
supporting.
I just referenced them because I mean it was very specific how they were in their own community
Yeah,
and no one interfered with the fact that they were
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I was down there 2 or 3 times and they had nice businesses that were set up down there. They had a professional recording studio
Yeah,
that would outstrip Motown
right.
as far as the equipment that they had. You know, it's just again that their leadership and their politics and their changing ideology, from Islam to Hebrew, they just kept flipping, flipping, flipping.
Right, right.
And then, of course, the exploits that their leader was accused of, that he actually is in prison right now because of certain things that he did, took advantage of the children and that kind of thing, which I won't get into in detail. But the point is that, when you're not being properly guided, because your reach is too extended, you're not really dealing with what Allah would call first things first.
Right.
And the first things first involves you being committed to the development and the evolution of your household. Allah says that life comes into existence min nafsin wahida, based on one soul, and then it becomes split into two, and then it becomes three and more. That's the process. It's the concentric circle model.
Mm.
We can't reach all of the way out there across the waters like we used to have on the front of the Muhammad speaks, hands across the waters,
Right,
the African, the African
right,
American doing trade. You won't even trade with your cousin Pookie.
right.
You understand what I'm saying? You 12 years old. You don't want him to play with your little fire engine.
Right, right.
When he wants to play with that little police car, you won't even trade on that level for just a few minutes worth. So
Right.
we have to shift paradigms in terms of how we operate mentally and emotionally. If we don't make that shift, it's like the seasons that refuse to make a shift. You're going to run into a lot of turbulence, man, trying to hold back the next season from appearing. That's what we're doing, because this is all a fitrah plan that Allah has laid out. And if you are operating outside of his fitrah plan, it's going to be nothing but collisions and confusion and clashes.
Do you think
You can't stop winter from coming in.
outside of Philadelphia, throughout the country, Muslims and community or Muslim communities look at that situation as a Philadelphia issue and really don't embrace it as a bad look for all Muslims?
Yeah, if they're looking at it as a purely Philadelphia phenomenon, they're making a big mistake. And this is what I was initially going to say. They're making a major mistake, because I believe that these issues are contrived and manipulated by powers that we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not anything new. How did Muslims who were in Spain, from Morocco, from Arabia, right? They were in Spain for at least 700 years. and they brought about a cultural revolution in ancient Andalusia, as it was called in Spain. And they were working with the Sephardic Jews. They were working with the Christians in Spain and the Muslims. Those three major groups, they were having powwows and teaching sessions on a daily basis. And they were sharing the sciences. They were sharing that knowledge.
Mhm.
They taught the Spanish people how to build irrigation systems when the Spanish people didn't even know what it was to take a shower or to bathe or to have a fountain. The Muslims came there and constructed those things for them. See? So they brought with them many, many blessings and technological progress into Spain. But then some wise somebody said, now, if we keep letting the Muslims grow in popularity like this, they're going to wind up taking over all of Spain. So they decided, well, we got to break up the party here. What did they do? Now, here, connect this and the Philadelphia dots.
Mhm.
They went and got a competing body of Muslims. And they pitted those competing body of Muslims against the Muslims who were in Spain. And they did each other in. And I see the same exact scheme. I read blueprints. I read schemes. I read patterns. And I see the exact same pattern happening. They like to have one happen first so that they can judge their accuracy. Let's see if it works here. If it works here, we know we can just uplift this and import it into any city we want. Chicago's primed for it, aren't they?
Yeah, so you don't think that nationally Muslims don't realize that Philadelphia was a bad look for all Muslims, not just that Philadelphia incident?
I think it depends on the individual because it's not widespread yet. And I say yet with caution.
Right.
It's not yet widespread. If it happens again, then for sure,
Well,
they say, yeah,
that's why I'm asking this, because we don't want it to happen again.
no.
And
And
we don't want it this widespread.
if I'm
So
right, you won't be able to stop it because you don't know where it's coming from. You don't realize that there are powers sitting behind closed doors who
right,
are orchestrating this
right,
behavior.
right.
See? So if we think it's just like a natural phenomenon because populations are getting bigger, because immigrants are coming into the country, or because there are competing gangs and there's more gang life.
It's more than that.
Absolutely. The Bloods and the Crips are government agents.
Well, I always say they sit across the aisle in public, but they sit at the same table in private. So, we know that whole
The
scenario.
Bloods, I'm going to repeat it, the Bloods and the Crips are government agents on the most part. The leaders I'm talking about, not the common guy who joins from the neighborhood, but the people who are the El Rickens over there in Chicago. Those are people who are bought and paid by the United States, by secret components of the United States government to do exactly. Where do they get all these weapons? You know how they listen. Oh man. Not only in Chicago, but in Detroit and many of the other larger center cities where African Americans reside, the average guy on the street knows that the police are dropping off the weapons. You understand what I'm saying? They let them know at a certain time, 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, there's going to be this drop. And that's where they get, how else are they getting all of these weapons?
Well, that's what the young kids always ask me. You mean to tell me y'all didn't have no shootings when you was? I said, yeah, we had them, but we didn't have assault rifles.
Tell them to watch the movie. What was it? What was that? The Jets and the Sharks. What movie was that?
Oh, West Side Story.
West Side. Tell them to watch the West Side Story. There are two different versions of it.
Yeah.
There's the original, and then there's the one they did a couple of years ago, right? The remake.
Yeah.
They weren't shooting each other down with assault weapons.
Right.
They were mostly knives.
Right.
And until one guy decided, I'm going to bring a pistol.
Right.
And that wasn't a rifle. That was just a pistol.
Right.
And that's how most of the gangs in New York and these other center cities, that's how they were rolling back then. They weren't thinking about being the popo and coming out with all of this art. They didn't have access to that artillery.
Yeah, but they still don't have access to it. Somebody is giving them that, you're not gonna tell me you can go down the hood and the corner bodega and buy an assault rifle.
No, and we know that now because there are police, there are CIA folks who have confessed
right
to that being their MO. No pun intended. That's their modus operandi.
But if we know that and we know we're their targets, then we have. I have questions about our collectiveness. I have real questions about, you know, can we collectively have a collective agenda that addresses our issues and not just, that's why I asked you to think about a Muslim saying that's a Philadelphia problem. And, you know what I mean? Because to me, if that had happened in California or Chicago or Detroit, and I got word of it, I would still say the same thing. That's a bad look for all Muslims.
Absolutely. That's the intention, to make it a bad look so that nobody wants to be what you are.
Yeah.
That's the whole intention. If these people become this and the young people began to read the Quran and they begin to coalesce with each other and build businesses together, small businesses together, that's not what some people on top want.
I tell you what, I listened to a few kut bars through YouTube, right? I didn't hear no kut bars on that subject today. What we're talking about today, I didn't hear no kut bars.
You won't. You want to know why?
But you have to hear about it.
You want to know why you're not hearing any? Because without pointing the finger at any particular imam or masjid, I'm speaking about a collective problem right now. Many of these leaders are bought and paid. They're bought and paid for. See, as soon as you accept to be a 501c3, now we're talking business, right? Soon as you say my church is a 501c3, that means that now you're committed to receiving a certain amount of funds from the government. Whoever you're receiving funds from is the one making the ultimate decisions for what you do, how you do, why you do, when you do. It's no longer you and your independent financial pockets that you got together with your family member and your neighbor and put together so that you are the boss. As soon as they say, we're going to give you a certain amount of thousands of dollars per year, tax-free, because you're a 501c3 or 501c4, you're not going to interrupt that flow. So you're going to say what you're told to say. I know this sounds harsh, and a lot of people won't like me for saying this, but it's a fact. You are going to say, as soon as the whole C word thing happened, the COVID, you know what, right? The first community of religious people to shut down were the Muslims, immigrant and national.
So basically, you telling me I'm just disillusioned.
No, I'm saying I'm saying you're awake. But the only thing missing from your puzzle is what to do about it. You're not disillusioned or illusioned about what's going on. It's very clear that something is going on. But the whole issue right now is to determine what to do about it. And this is why I keep pointing back to the Quran. All you who have accepted faith, save yourselves. That's a big statement from Allah in the Quran. I see, I can't put that on the same scale with what Jesse Jackson said or Louis Farrakhan said, or even what Imam Muhammad said, if he's not coming straight from the Quran. The Quran comes straight from the Quran, and it gives you the solution to what you're talking about. But what will happen in following the Quranic advice is that at the end of that journey, there won't be 1 million of you at a march in Washington, D.C. That's not the objective, to have a 10 million man march. That's not the objective of the Quran. That's why Imam Muhammad didn't join it, because he knows that's not the objective. You know what he said to do? He said, okay, that's nice. All of you got together in DC and you had all of these, chants and sayings and all of that. And you had your grandchild on your shoulders and all that. He said, I would have joined you had you went into the neighborhoods doing what you're talking about doing right now. Went into the neighborhoods, and he said, and pick up a broom and a dustpan and have a sanitation truck behind you and start cleaning up your own communities. See, that's what I mean is the difference between ritual. That march was a ritual. And routine. If you routinely went out every other week with a group of men, at least, if not men and women and children, I used to do it when I was living in Far Rockaway. My wife and little children at the time, they were 4 and 5 and 10 years old at the time. Every weekend, or at least every other weekend, we would be out there. We'd purchase our own garbage bags, and we told the city what we were doing. They volunteered to give us garbage bags, brooms. You follow what I'm saying? We did it when we owned property upstate New York. Same thing. My wife and I and her son, we used to get out there and do exactly what I'm telling you right now. We didn't wait for CNN and ABC and NBC to take notice. We did it. And you know what happened? Them same thugs that were up the block sitting on the stoop, they started joining us. They felt embarrassed. They said, yo, brother, can we help? You got an extra broom? Yeah, man, come on, man. And they ended up, and before you know it, man, that whole block was what 116th Street used to be back in the day when you couldn't find a cigarette butt. That's the way to do it. It has to be concentric circles, but you got to commit to it. And at the end of it, you cannot see the world following your example. If that was the Muhammad, the prophet, if that was in his head, he would have never made any progress. He started with his family. Ali, Khadija.
Mm.
He was following the fitra pattern for how you make progress. And if it stopped at just him and his small circle of family members, that he would have still been successful in Allah's eyes. So how many people can we count right now from our individual families who we have, in our opinion, adequately explained this deen to and show them how to benefit from the Quran, whether they take Shahada or not? You mentioned something in the beginning that we can conclude on. Most Muslims don't know that Allah says that Hajj is for all mankind, not just Muslims. Most people don't know that Ramadan, I'm talking going to the Quran now, not the muftis and the sheikhs.
Mm-hmm.
Allah says that Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed as guidance for mankind.
Right.
So what is this locking ourselves up in the masjid every Ramadan for suhoor and tarawih? But they don't even see Muslims during Ramadan anymore because they're so busy going back and forth to the masjid, back and forth to home, back and forth to the masjid, and they just seclude themselves. There's no cloistering and sequestering of Muslims during Ramadan as far as the Quran goes. Allah says you got this Ramadan and this Quran as a gift of guidance that you're supposed to be sharing with human beings, not Muslim. We're talking about the difference between Muslim and Mu'min. The highlight of the Quran is that we're supposed to be speaking to human concerns and nas to everybody. How many of us have a program for that?
And the prophet was sent to humanity.
That's right.
He wasn't sent. He wasn't sent to the Muslims. Wasn't
That's
no
right.
Muslim. Wasn't no Muslim.
Rahmatul linnas. He's a mercy to all humanity.
Right. Yeah.
So we have to have a part 2.
Okay. I enjoyed this, man. But
man, it was my pleasure.
I'm serious, man. We can't drop the ball because I don't know any Muslim that would have envisioned what we just experienced at the end. I don't know no Muslim that would, if I had brought that up, I believe every Muslim would have said, boy, you crazy.
They would have ran you out of the city.
You crazy, you nuts.
But I would just say to you, my brother, pay attention from this point on, because everything that happens is going to be significant. Mm-hmm. Because they are planning this. This is not just happenstance.
No, I don't.
They've already sold enough seeds of division with the whole separation of what you wear versus what I wear, you wearing a beard versus me not wearing a beard. They've been seeding that division for decades.
Right.
You call yourself a Sunni, he calls himself a whatever, the strictest of the Islamic groups are, the Wahhabis, or we calling ourselves all these different things. And they know that, you meet a Muslim, he asks you, well, I remember I met a Muslim once in one of those strict kind of, I call them cults because that's what they are. And the first question he asked me, he said, where is Allah? That's what they're taught to ask as a first question. To a Muslim, they say, go to the other Muslims who are not in this clique that you mentioned. They're cliques. And ask him, where's Allah? And watch. And then if he says this, then say that. If he says the other thing, then say this other thing. And if you say Allah is everywhere, they say, no, brother, not according to the Hadith. According to the Hadith, he is above the 7th heaven. And they put a physical location to Allah.
Right.
So if you say Allah is everywhere at all times, they're going to say you're wrong. They're going to call you a kafir.
Yeah.
That's how they seed this foolishness amongst us, by making one person think he's smarter than the next person. That's Iblis. You created me from fire. Fire is the property of the intellect. Right. So whenever you see people who come to you with an intellectual argument and try to downplay what you're saying based on them being smarter than you, that's not the Quran, brother. That's Iblis and his minions messing with you.
One last point.
Mhm.
This whole thing about marginalizing people, I mean, the prophet himself was admonished for marginalized the old blind man. You know what I mean? So it's very important to me that you take real stock in not marginalize somebody, because if the prophet was trying to recruit those Arabs, and the blind man was pulling on his sleeve, and he showed any signs of the displeasure, and Allah had to come in and remind him, then that's the highest of admonishment. You know what I mean? So I got an issue with that, because again, why would Allah admonish the prophet about the old blind man? If
Let me say this.
marginalization wasn't a real violation.
I'm going to say this, and I know it's going to start some trouble, not between me and you,
Right.
but between people who accept that narration that you just gave as referring to the prophet.
Right.
There's nothing in that surah that says it's referring to the prophet who did that. Nothing. Not saying he couldn't have done it, not saying he wouldn't have done it. I'm saying that that's not what that particular ayat is referring to when it says that he turned away, you know, and kind of showed a displeasure in the wrinkles in his forehead, at least, you know, that he was displeased. We know the prophet had an excellent countenance. Anytime he would meet somebody, he was smiling, you know, or he was serious because he was teaching or something like that. So that particular ayat is not, even if you understand what Abasa means, that's the name of the surah, and they translate it as he frowned. But I'm not going to go into it tonight. It'll take too long to explain. But if you just remember to ask me that the next time we meet, I'll give you what I believe to be an adequate understanding of what that word means and the context in which Allah is using it in the Quran, not to refer to Muhammad, but to refer to another set of circumstances dealing with another set of people.
So did I misquote that?
Not if you're following the English translation. That's what I mean by these English translations that became dependent on Persian meanings for words. That's a whole, I mean, if you just go through some of my videos on my channel, I open up those things every time I get a chance. So you'll see from the titles of my videos what it's dealing with in terms of language and that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is that we are quoting these Quranic, what we believe to be Quranic passages, but it's not based on what I'm referring to now as fitra-based Arabic.
Right. Okay.
Meaning the Arabic that the Arabs understood at that time. Most of what we're quoting is based on Arabic as it was sifted through Persian translations. That's all I'm saying. Right? So that's another thing that just the whole scholarship in our deen has to eventually deal with, because it is the major problem amongst Muslim scholars, how we view these words and interpret these words into our respective languages. It is mostly incorrect. And they're basing it again on that first dictionary. The first dictionary, if you're a scholar out there and you want to know what I'm talking about, where I'm talking about, that dictionary was called El Ain. They translate that as the eye. That should tell you something, right? El Ain. And it was Persians who did that. All of the hadiths come out of the Persian lands. So what is it about Persia that made them so outstanding as scholars? And they were supposed to be scholars right there in Mecca and Medina that were supposed to be teaching. Because once the deen and the Muslims from Arabia went into Persia, they began to fabricate hadiths to support the scheme that they were beginning to establish, that they wanted. You got to understand, let me just say this, this is very important, very important. And this is in the Quran, that the hypocrites called El-Munafiq that were in Mecca, when the Prophet came back triumphantly and took Mecca back from the pagan hypocrites. The pagan Arabs, he took it back from them who were openly supporting shirk. But amongst the people who began to join the ranks, when the ranks began to swell, when Muhammad came back and said, you have to leave this city if you're going to continue to practice shirk. So many of them hypocritically took Shahada. So that's who this is addressing. The people who left Mecca to go into Persia, to conquer Persia, which the Quran, as we said, established in the beginning, that the Quran says don't do that. La ikraha fi din, no compelling in the deen. It was the hypocrites who pushed that agenda. So when they went into Persia and caused the Zoroastrians to become Muslims or die, it was at the point of the sword. So when these people say Islam is a violent religion, because they say if you don't accept our religion, you have to have your head cut off, that's partly true, but it's only true for the people who were not following the Quran. The Quran never says that. That's what they were saying. And it was from the mind of the hypocrite that they were doing that. So we have to understand that much of the so-called religion became sifted through the purview of pagans and hypocrite Arabs. They have a whole surah on them in the Quran that says they are the ones who say, we believe in Allah and you are his messenger. And Allah says, yeah, I'm Allah. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing. I'm Allah and that is my messenger, but I'm also telling you that the hypocrites are liars. So even though they were quoting the Shahadatain, so to speak, and saying what every Muslim was saying, Allah said, be aware of them. They are the hypocrites. The hypocrites are not in your face with it. So when they began to establish a platform for the deen, they did it based upon terminology that was crooked. That was eventually, you know how it is when you verge off just a little bit. But if you're not on the straight path, that little verge right there that looks like nothing, when you go further and further out, you're all the way out there. That's what happened to our deen. That's why we can't identify. That's why Muslims are fighting each other in Philly next year to be Chicago and Detroit after that, because they don't like what they're seeing happening amongst the Muslims in Dearborn and in Hamtramck, Michigan, where they took over the whole city politically. Muslims, immigrant Muslims. They don't want that. They don't want that to spread. That's a disease for people in positions of power. We do not want Muslims thinking that they can take over American cities. So they're going to fight against you with the weakest among you, and the weakest right now are the so-called African-American Muslims. Because you don't have any more leadership. W.D. Muhammad ain't here to tell you nothing further. So if you're not really invested in his language, like I and a few other people, maybe yourself, I don't know what you've been looking at or studying. If you are not that deeply invested in the wisdom, not his body and his personality, forget that. He's just a human like all the rest of us. But if you're not deeply invested in what you believe he was gifted with it, as far as information goes, then you're going to continue following the same trail, and it's going to lead you to the same cliff with all of the other people who fell over in history, beginning, as I said, with the Muslims of Spain, who went for the okie doke and started fighting against their brother Muslims, killing their brother Muslims, and then the Inquisition happened behind that.
Do you think we're gonna go on forever, right?
Yeah.
I think that the Imam's methodology has been lost, and I'm gonna give you an example. I tell people all the time, I'm not a Muslim scholar or whatever, but what I know about Islam and what I've learned from the Imam over the years.
Yeah.
If the Imam came to me with the language he came to us in 1975, he would be insulting my intelligence. I say that to say that that's how much that baby language allowed me to grow.
Yes.
So my question is, do you think with new Muslims and stuff, we need to kind of temper the language in a more elementary posture so that
great question
grow into this religion? Because
great
believe me,
question.
I got a couple of books that got all the old Bilalian news articles and stuff like that. And I was reading
here. Yeah.
I was reading it one day and I just started laughing. I was by myself, I just started laughing. I said, if the Imam tried to come to me with this language now, he would be insulting my intelligence.
Right, but he wouldn't be insulting the intelligence of the average young brother on the street right now.
That's my point.
So
when he brought it when he first brought it to us, he wasn't insulting our intelligence.
No, I'm gonna tell you why.
Because we were kindergarten babies.
That's what he called us. He said, you're following kindergarten language.
Right.
And he's got to evolve you. He's got to go to where you are.
But he didn't step into with some esoteric language. He met us at our level.
He met us at our level, but he gave us the ingredients that are born out of esoteric language.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us that a few years before he passed in Chicago. I was there live when he said it. He said, we have to become used to learning more about metaphysics. Mm-hmm. He said, I've been teaching it to you all the time, but I wasn't calling it that. Mm-hmm. So now when you talk about metaphysics, you're talking about them. I don't know if you've heard of Manly P. Hall. These people, Goddard. I mean, these are thinkers, Western thinkers, brother, who took esoteric language to a whole new level using the simplicity of phrases like man means mind. Mm-hmm. Words make people. How much can you get out of that? Instructor Benjamin Bilal reinvestigated those mantras. I call them mantras. Mm-hmm. So he didn't just say man means mind. He told you what the English word man meant. Right. That's what makes him different than those other people who are feeding you kindergarten stuff. He said man means mind. And I went and looked in whatever the standard dictionary was at that time, Webster's or whatever. I looked in all of them. And I looked up the word man and I could not find the word mind. Mm-hmm. Until I went to Columbia University bookstore. And there was a book sitting all the way up on the top shelf called Etymology, Word Origins. And I said, etymology? Never heard of that before. Mm-hmm. I asked the man to go get the step ladder, and bring that book down. And the first word I looked for was man. And guess what the first meaning was? Mind. Sitting right there looking at me. I looked up human because he said human means humus mind. Mm-hmm. Moisture in the soil. Mm-hmm. That's humus. Mm-hmm. I looked up that word. I looked up humus. It said wet soil, and then it connected it with man, humus mind. That the mind is like soil, fresh soil. But if you don't put any moisture in the soil, you're not going to get any growth. Right. So just that little kindergarten concept began bringing out all of these lofty ideas. Right. So I say, yes, we need to go back to some of that original language that he taught, but with this little caveat that I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but I'm a gifted person. Allah has gifted this little New Yorker, this little subterranean Harlemite, because I was just below Harlem. Yeah. He's gifted me with a few blessings, but it's not for me. Right. It's the inheritance of all those people who said they followed W.D. Muhammad. Right. And some of them are the ones who are attacking me, but they never do it out front. They never do it in my face. It's always behind the scenes. What are you so afraid of? Let's do what we're doing right now. Let's bring it to the table. Don't we love each other as we said we did back in the day? So how come we can't talk to each other even if we differ? Right. The Sahaba differed with each other. Some of them differed with the Prophet. Right. They asked him, what you telling us to do? Is that in the Quran? He said, no. They said, well, I don't have to follow it. Right. So they had intellectual debate. Right. These were the most honest people trying to build a community. If we're truly trying to build a community, we can't do it as elites. Right. Like this whole elitism thing. Right. We can't do it just because we're wearing a suit and a tie and giving a khutbah every week and pretend like we know better than the guy who just came in the door 2 months ago, because we might not. That's why I said that initial thing you talked about, the difference between a Muslim and a mu'min. How are you going to judge that on the table of time? How long does it take before a Muslim becomes a mu'min? You can't judge it like that. You could have been here for 3 decades. And a guy comes in 3 months and outstrips what you know. Mm-hmm. And depending on how he presents his package will determine whether we can accept it as, valid or whatever. If he comes in with a whole bunch of arrogance, then, it sounds good, but I can't. No. So I'm trying my best without being any kind of arrogant. When I come before you, I dress like this, I don't wear kufi and all that other stuff and, stuff hanging off the side of my head. And I don't see a need to do that. All I want to do is connect with your inheritance.
Mhm.
And in the process, Allah is allowing Muslims from all over the world now to join my class.
Mhm.
I predicted it, but I didn't know it for sure. And I didn't think it would come this quick. But there are people from the other side of the planet right now who are in love with this nunetics thing that I keep teaching. The meanings of individual Arabic letters and how those meanings of the individual letters affect the meaning of, in fact, they dictate the meaning of the word. They teach us through 3-letter roots,
Right.
taba, kataba, so forth, right? But who decided that each one of those 3 roots was going to mean what they say it means? What round table decided that kataba is going to mean a book, or whatever, fataha is going to mean to open? Who decided that? That's the question we should be asking.
Mhm.
So Allah blessed me to come into contact with the essence of the meanings of these letters.
Mhm.
And he also blessed me to discover that each one of these Arabic letters are parts of your body. So what does that do? It puts you in the driver's seat when it comes to learning the fitra-based or the nature-based Quran. Because if the letter kaf, K-A-F, means the palm of the hand, I don't need to go to school to know what that is. All I got to do is operate it, see what
Right.
it does. Does it hold things? Does it grasp things? That's what kat means. So wherever it's used in an Arabic word, kataba, I know it's going to have something to do with something in your hand that is able to grasp.
Right.
And then if I follow Imam Muhammad's logic and apply the allegorical, so-called allegorical meaning, I say the metaphysical meaning, then I know that grasping is not just an act of the physical hand, it's also an act of the intellect.
Right.
Because just like you have 5 physical fingers on the physical hand, you have 5 basic senses operating in the intellect that is able to grasp.
Right.
And that's why when you understand something, you say, I got it.
Right.
I got it. You got it. But up here.
Mhm.
Now imagine if you applied what I just told you to every word and every letter that you're reading in the Quran. You'll be having the field day that Instructor Blau is having.
Mhm.
Because the knowledge never goes stale.
Right.
Because the fitrah never goes stale. Things to
Exactly.
study in nature will never go stale.
Mhm.
So that's my process. And that's what I'm encouraging. Although if we were to do this, I'm telling you, Allah would take this little nappy-headed community of ours in America and sit us immediately on top of the world. If we would just commit to the study of the fitrah through this process that I'm talking about called nunetics. You don't even have to call it nunetics. Call it whatever you want. Put your name on it. I don't care. But understand that the Muslims of old, under Muhammad, understood that every letter had a meaning. It's in one of his hadiths. He said, Alif Lam Mim. He said, those letters have meanings. He said, I don't mean as a combination of letters, Alif Lam Mim. He said, Alif has a meaning. Lam has a meaning. Mim has a meaning. That's in a Bukhari Muslim hadith.
Mhm.
So you don't have to say, I said it. Just say Muhammad the Prophet. You believe he said it because it's in a standardized hadith. And if that's true, and if Aleph means the spine in your back, then all you have to do is begin studying what the spine does. Once you understand what the spine is doing physically in your back, keeping you upright,
Right.
But it's also flexible, right? Then if a word in the Quran, an important word like iman, amana, belief, faith, has that Aleph as its first letter, then everything that the physical part of the body does now becomes factored into the more metaphysical meaning of the word. So Iman is responsible for you being upright.
Mhm.
But Iman also has flexibility. You're not like the British soldiers.
Rigid. Yeah.
Yeah, you ain't rigid like that. So that's all I'm saying. We have a brand new system. Allah has not left us alone because a man died in 2008. He hasn't
Mhm.
left us alone. Other people have their leadership that they practically worship. We have a leadership that we know better than to worship. We don't put them on the same scale as the prophets and the messengers and all of, we don't put them on the same. He's just a human being born out of our community and circumstances. But because he's born out of our community and circumstances, he was best qualified to address our circumstances. And the criminal thing that's being done now is that the people who say they were with him have practically turned their backs on him, because none of them are saying anything that he was talking about. They're giving you all what the immigrant scholars are saying. That's not what he was talking about. He said some things that were so radical that people never heard, but it's in many of his books, and it's in the minds of the people who were there when he said it, like myself. I have well over 1,000 lectures. I mean, that's on the low side, because I was hungry as a 17-year-old when I was trying to figure out this man means mind thing in a word to make people think. I was hungry, man. I was starving. And Allah said, I'm going to let that little starving mind of yours blossom.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If he had came to you then with the knowledge you know now, he would have confused you. So he had to give you small.
He said things at the time that were up above my ability to understand, and I just put it on the side.
Right.
That ain't for me. But I'm gonna take this little chunk that I can digest,
right,
and work with that. It was really that simple. Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we got to do this again, man.
Oh man, this is our pleasure.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this so much, man, and I thank you for taking the time away
Make sure
from
you just
your other concerns.
When you download it, send me the link.
Yeah, I'm going to send you the link. It'll be a YouTube link. When you get to the YouTube channel, just subscribe, so anything I do will pop up in your feed.
All right. Okay.
And I won't have to send it to you every time I do something.
I think that I already did that.
Yeah. Sometimes people will do that, and YouTube for some reason will unconnect you or disconnect.
So all I have to do is actually type your name in.
Yeah, just type in Instructor Benjamin Bilal and subscribe now. So as soon as I'm finished messing with this tonight, it'll automatically come to you. Even if it doesn't go up until 2 in the morning, you'll still hear a ding, ding appear in your phone, and you'll have it. Okay.
Okay, my brother.
All right.
It's been a pleasure. Stay in touch, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have a class every Sunday at 3 p.m. So I'll send you the link for that also in the morning.
Okay.
Okay. Appreciate you, man.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. I love you, man. And I'm so happy we had a chance to reconnect. Yeah, this is amazing.
It's been a while, man. I'm glad we got together.
Yeah. All right. Take care of yourself. Now, you know, my wife is a health professional. So if you need some on the side kind of coaching, she'll be more than happy to do that and won't charge you anything.
I'm pretty much in good hands. I'm just getting old, man.
Well, I wouldn't chalk it up that quick to just getting old.
Well, we talked about things we did. I was very athletic, and I'm paying for it.
Yeah.
You don't realize that. I tell people all the time that when Allah designed this human body, he didn't have 82 games a season in mind, and
no. But remember now, you had warriors in history who had similar circumstances.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that along with the aging process comes
you got to take care
comes new remedies for things.
Right.
So there might be something for muscle ache or whatever you might be going through, backache and that kind of thing, or misaligned spine or something. There's new stuff coming out that if you are aware of it, you could be living a more quality life. You don't want to just grow old and be miserable.
Oh, no.
It's not necessary.
It ain't got to that point yet. Yeah.
It's not necessary. Yeah. All right,
my brother. Love you. Be safe, man.
I love you too, man. All right. Greetings to those around you also.